Welcome to the Staying Active Podcast.
All right, we are back again. Staying Active Podcast with Dr. Jon Lis. What's going on, John?
Not much. I'm enjoying the warmer weather. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm Derek, and we're talking GLP medication today. GLP-1s. I was thinking about this topic a lot leading up to today, and I know what's going to end up happening. I'm going to go off on a tangent of some sort. I'm going to do my best to rope it in. But I think that we're going to just probably have to have a whole thing about peptides just in general. Because it's not even like, my opener here is like, why is this suddenly everywhere? It's not only suddenly everywhere, but it's basically ubiquitous at this point. It's everywhere. It's all at once at the same time. It's crazy. And then simultaneously to that is the peptide market. Outside of that, like the performance peptide market is exploding. And then we haven't even started to touch on things like myostatin inhibitors, which are already in production but are not yet being talked about or even remotely legal. So again, without going on a complete rant, I want to start with GLP-1s and then slowly descend into madness here. So for everybody listening, come for the ride. Good luck. I apologize in advance. John, tell me everything. Why are they suddenly not so suddenly everywhere? Why are they completely ubiquitous and just a part of the mainstream day to day now?
So that's a great point, and I don't think we'll dissolve too much into madness. But
excellent.
GLPs, in my opinion, and this is an opinion that many other people share.
Okay.
But they have kind of exploded on the scene mainly because they are a relatively easy way to lose weight. That's it, period, full stop. Believe it or not, though, these have actually been around for quite some time. Do you know how long ago the first GLP-1 was introduced?
Well, I'm pretty sure that insulin is also like associated to it. Is it not? I could be wrong here, but I know that the GLP ones were maybe not ones, but just GLP as a general idea were originally part like for diabetes treatment. So I'm pretty sure it's been around for a while. It's like the 80s or something. But I could be wrong.
So they haven't been around quite that long, but you're right. They were initially for diabetes management.
Yeah.
And if GLP-1s were a person, they would be able to drink this year.
Wow. There we go.
2005 was the first GLP-1 that was released. Byetta was the trade name at that point, and that was for diabetes management. And it's important. I think it's a cool piece of trivia because people are always like, oh, these are new and scary, and it's actually they've been around for some time.
Sure.
The class. But as diabetes medications, they work in a few different ways, and as weight loss medications. So GLP-1 agonists, what that means is it's a medication that promotes the GLP-1 receptor to do its thing. GLP-1 stands for glucagon-like peptide receptor type 1. And what it does is it does really three big things in the body. The biggest one, and the way that we get the weight loss, is that it suppresses appetite. It also improves insulin sensitivity. So it tells the pancreas to kind of release insulin in a kind of a better coordinated way in response to food and calories. And then the third way is that it suppresses glucagon. And glucagon is a hormone that basically tells your body to produce its own sugar from the liver. And so most people who are overweight or have diabetes do not need extra sugar in the system. And so it kind of fixes that flaw in the pathophysiology of diabetes. And so when these medications started coming out, they were pretty effective for lowering your hemoglobin A1C, which is a marker of blood sugar in all people, but pretty good at lowering that for people with diabetes. And then kind of like the story of how Viagra came out, In the story of GLP-1s, people are like, oh, actually, these patients are losing weight. That's interesting. Why is that? Is their diabetes getting worse? Is it getting better? Is it some other reason? And pharmaceutical companies are not dumb. They realized, hold on a second, if people are just losing weight on this medication, can we give this to more people than just people with diabetes as a weight loss medication? And it turns out, as these classes of medications got better from the 2005 introduction, that's exactly what they could do. And so now what we have is a way for people who have struggled with weight loss, who are overweight or obese, who have conditions that are associated with being overweight and obese. We have a way for them to lose weight pretty quickly, pretty reliably, and at a fairly large magnitude, without ever having to lift a finger virtually. And so I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit. Ideally, we don't want people just to use the medication to lose weight, but there are some patients absolutely that need this type of thing. There are quite a bit of patients and people out there who just take this for vanity's sake, which is, I would argue, a terrible reason to take any type of medication. But it happens. And that's why these types of drugs are blockbusters, and why stock in these companies is doing quite well. I don't own any stock in these companies, I should mention. But yeah, that's kind of the long and short of it.
No, that's really good. I appreciate that, as just like to get us going and kind of set the pace of like what's going on, what is it, who's it for, and so maybe let's dig into a little bit more of the details on that.
Yeah.
Because you had mentioned people do lose weight, and pharmaceutical companies have noticed that, and as a result, it's being kind of pushed in that way a little bit more. Personal experience, I still see some clients, right? I speak to many patients, so I still have my thumb on the patient and client market, pretty well. And from my perspective, again, I'm not a physician, so I can say more of whatever I want, and it tends to matter less. But it does seem like some of these people are what I might call unqualified for the use of some of this medication, trying to lose that extra 10 pounds. And it obviously does work, but maybe more of a targeted question is like, who shouldn't be using this, and who is this actually for? Obviously, people who are struggling with diabetes or even pre-diabetes seem like highly qualified people. You've got something going on with your sugar, right, with your insulin, and this can help you with that, obviously. So is there other markets of people outside of that particular scope that this medication is for? And also maybe who shouldn't be using them?
It's a good question. So by the book, the people who should be the people who this is indicated for, FDA approval for this class of medications, is people with type 2 diabetes, which is pretty standard. That's what it was built for.
Sure.
And as a weight loss medication, people who have a BMI of 30 or greater, which is technically into the obese category. And of course, BMI is kind of a flawed way to think about it, but it's an easy way to categorize somebody's weight. So BMI of 30 or greater, or a BMI of 28 or greater, essentially 28 or greater, with what we call comorbidities that are associated with obesity. So things that go along with it, like obstructive sleep apnea, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, something like that. You have to have, like, maybe you're not so overweight that you meet obese criteria, but you have something else that obesity and being overweight affects or causes. And so those are the people who like unequivocally qualify for this medication. It's been FDA approved for that. It's safe for them to take. The people who absolutely should under no circumstance take this are people, I mean, it's like when you see the ads, right? It's like these ads are everywhere. People who are allergic to it, but I've never met anyone who's allergic to it. Anyone with medullary thyroid cancer, which a patient would know if they had it, it's pretty rare, luckily, or something called multiple endocrine neoplasia type 2. It's a cancer syndrome that's, again, very rare.
Hmm.
But beyond that, the kind of like relative contraindications, who should not be on this typically are people who are, of relatively normal weight, people who want to lose, like you said, that last like 5-10 pounds. It's not ideal for them. And the reason why, other than it just being, we shouldn't, on principle, in my opinion, my strong opinion, be taking things that we don't need, is that it can cause at that, like when you're that close to being ideal weight, you're at risk of losing more muscle mass than fat mass,
Yeah.
simply because you're not eating enough calories to kind of keep up with what you need. And if you're not also eating a relatively high protein diet and doing the weight and resistance training, things that we've talked about in other episodes, you're at pretty high risk actually for sarcopenia. And we know that that is not good. So people, the people who are taking it, and there's celebrities, and it's been in the news in a bunch of different ways. I'm not going to name any names, but people who are taking this who shouldn't be taking it, they're putting themselves in harm's way. And oftentimes you'll see like these people kind of look unhealthy, to put it mildly, kind of gaunt and sunken. And like, if you're not doing it the right way, and there's absolutely right way to do this and a right patient for it, if you're not the right patient and you're not doing it the right way, you're at risk of harm. And so
Yeah.
that's the, making sure that first and foremost, we're not doing harm, of course, but picking the patients that are appropriate for this, and there are very clear and well thought out criteria, is important. As a last kind of aside, though, these drugs are being studied more and more for all sorts of other indications. And so people are taking these sort of off label and using them sort of off label for everything from cardiovascular disease to Alzheimer's disease prevention to fatty liver, and even it's been studied in addiction. So
Yeah.
people are trying to throw the kitchen sink or GLP-1s they're trying to use it for everything. My analogy completely fell apart there, but they're trying to use it for everything. But it's unless we have the true data about whether this is really something that works or not, it's a little bit of a wild west in terms of people using it off label.
Yeah, that's one of my primary concerns for people is when I'll call it cosmetically, whether or not that's the appropriate term or not. But when people start to utilize this a little bit more cosmetically, they're trying to get the last few pounds or whatever the case is. My concern is when people don't have a really great picture on how much muscle mass that they actually have, because the data is quite clear about muscle mass loss in really any deprivation state, right? When you go into a cut or a diet, whatever you want to call it, typically you lose about 40% of the total weight lost in muscle mass, right? And that's kind of across the board. And so that can become a pretty serious problem when you don't have a lot of muscle mass to lose already. One of the things that I have seen and I've heard about is a lot of people, maybe this leans into like the celebrity kind of idea of like what you were talking about. People using it to deal with kind of these off-label things like some people call it food noise or like that like addiction type behavior. And from what I understand, it's quite effective, at least anecdotally, for that. But that's where I'm starting to see a lot of these people are at risk for these issues like osteoporosis, osteopenia, fall risks increase pretty tremendously. Um, that's really where my concern comes from, not having a great picture on it and then thinking that I'll just train my way out of this situation when there isn't enough caloric surplus to support that idea.
Right. It really goes back. There's no free lunch, right? There's no
Yeah,
free lunch.
it's great.
For some people, again, if they have, if they're significantly overweight into the obese category. Yes, I have patients who I have on these types of medications, and it's absolutely indicated for them, and they typically do pretty well if we do it the right way. I also, to your point, counsel them extensively on, okay, you're gonna feel full much sooner than you would previously. Sometimes people even feel nauseous Pretty common side effect. So if and when you're eating and you're kind of like feeling good to eat, feeling well enough to eat, a decent sized portion of food, you've got to make sure you're getting the protein macronutrient first. And you've got to make sure you're doing some sort of resistance training exercise to minimize the amount of muscle loss that we have.
Yeah.
And I have actually the 2 recent patients who come to mind who are on this. For every about 10 pounds of weight that they've lost 20% or less muscle, which is really, really good. Like it's almost inevitable you lose some muscle.
Sure.
But like you said, I try to challenge them to keep that below 30% muscle loss, muscle mass loss on our in-bodies, and it's absolutely doable. But like you said, if people are doing this kind of for the wrong reason, they're losing muscle mass, then they're putting themselves in harm's way down the line. They're basically, taking a benefit today for a questionable risk tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's never really a good deal. So I think it's of vital importance to make sure that if people are doing this, they're not just doing it willy-nilly. I don't know if this is something that you plan on getting into, but there are some third-party places that sell this type of stuff direct to consumers.
Yeah.
I'm not going to name any names, but they're advertised on TV, and it's like, hey, meet with our person virtually and automatically qualify for the GLP-1 of your choice. And although it sounds great in practice, these things are not. They're compounded typically from their own pharmacy. They're typically just kind of hawking the medication. The follow-up really isn't there. It can be pretty pricey across the board. So for all of those reasons, that's certainly not something I recommend. I just wanted to make sure I put that in there because they are somewhat popular.
Yeah, that's great because I definitely plan to get there, and I'd like to touch on that really quick while also stating, like, to be clear, I realize that I'm bringing up a lot of negatives right now. I'm actually a really big fan for the target market here.
Yeah.
I've seen some really incredible things and some people's like literal lives change as a result of these drugs. And so if you're a person who needs this, like, my goodness, this could change your life for the better, right?
Yeah.
And I just want to be clear on that like I think this is like remarkable and very cool. And for the people who I've seen get the benefit who really need it, I love that for them. And I'm so happy for them because it is stigmatized already. There are so many people in like the influencer spaces who just really put it down. And I can't come up with a good reason why you would just like over the top, just kind of glaze over that, every use, all of them are just bad. And I just don't understand that. As far as what you're talking about with some of these kind of like sidebar companies, it's direct to consumer stuff, I have a real serious problem with this. Maybe it's just because of my position with this company, right? Active Health specifically. You're passing the buck on continuity of care, right? If you prescribe somebody medicine, you are responsible for that person. They're your patient now. And if you're just like, hey, good luck, I don't want to throw terms around, but I really don't like it, John. I really don't. I know that you're not a fan either, so I won't, kick this to death, but I find that highly unethical.
Yeah, there's unquestionably a lack of skin in the game from that standpoint, and it's not. I guess it's more than not ideal. It's quite frankly very concerning. But
yeah,
to your earlier point though, I fully agree and couldn't agree more. Like for the right person, these are absolutely life-changing, revolutionary medications. Yeah. And for that reason, that's why I prescribe them. These are things that are in my medical armamentarium to give to patients. Typically as long as we're picking the right patient, as long as we're counseling them about possible side effects, as long as we're giving them talking them through, like, if X happens, then Y, and I'm available to them, unlike some of these other direct-to-consumer things, then it often it goes extremely well. And is can be life-changing for patients. So I wanted to just piggyback on that important point that you made.
Well, that's good, and I want to steer this back to the positive because otherwise
Yeah.
I'll just be like rah 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 the whole time. So, um, focusing on like who the ideal person is, right? The people who it really matters for.
Mhm.
I have a lot of questions that I think can be like clarifying for people, things that they should know or they should understand ahead of time. And so we just talked about a lot of things and a lot of use cases, some good, some like meh, not so good, whatever the case is, however you want to describe it. But as far as like what do they actually do, what's actually happening, like that sort of arena, um how do they impact like the brain or the gut? Is it both? Like what's happening there?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The actual like true mechanistic like molecule attaches to this receptor, which causes X to happen, which then causes Y to happen, which causes Z to happen.
Hmm.
Like the actual like cascade of receptor things, I am not an expert in for sure. But um, to keep things somewhat high level, there are the GLP-1 receptor is not just found, in the GI system.
Hmm.
In fact, it is somewhat more ubiquitous than that. There are GLP-1 receptors in the brain, which is probably the point of your question, I'm guessing. But they're, the pancreas, liver, the GI system there. There's a reason why. I guess taking a step back, anytime someone asks you like, where does this medication affect? You can really just look at side effects and see from there, like,
Oh,
okay, if
interesting.
it's affecting these, it has these types of side effects, it's probably affecting those systems, and it's a pretty good bet. It's not always, but it's a pretty good bet that there are receptors or some sort of effect on that tissue. So when you look at GLP-1s in particular, when they're looking for like, decreased appetite, the appetite's controlled in the brain and it's controlled in the gut. And so yes, those two absolutely, liver absolutely. In terms of like the thyroid stuff, yes, like those are multiple endocrine neoplasia and the medullary thyroid cancer. And even in like the lower intestine, like the colon, one of the I just said it. One of the side effects can be constipation, and so that's something also to note. So,
Okay.
but in terms of like the actual mechanistically, it's been well documented. It's in the FDA approval study that these drugs have to do now to get FDA approval. The mechanism is in there, so it's a well-known, well-documented mechanism of action. Um, but I'd have to phone a friend on that one specifically.
It's okay. Um, so I have to assume that the reason people are losing weight on this so effectively has a lot to do with uh, the way that like sugar and insulin is handled. Yeah.
Yeah. And so as my I knew it would happen as the camera goes off, which I'll get it back here. But yes, so there are two kind of big ways that these medications affect weight. And so the first one is actually through improved insulin sensitivity. And so it actually like the way that your body responds to food and calories is better, meaning that you release less insulin for a given amount of calories, which is a good thing, because then you don't insulin is anabolic, so it causes you to gain weight. And so if you don't have that weight gain from as much insulin from the improving insulin sensitivity as this falls, that is a very good thing. The second way that that it affects is just through the appetite suppression piece, and that's probably where we get most of the bang for our buck, is from appetite suppression. And so we call it early satiety, like you feel fuller sooner. It suppresses your total appetite. Also can some nausea, helps the appetite suppression, doesn't help the appetite. But you will inevitably eat less, especially as we start this typically at a really low dose, and then we'll escalate the dose as time goes on. But even at those lower doses, people tend to start to feel that appetite suppression. And so you're literally just consuming fewer calories at the end of the day.
So it's kind of a two-part situation then, right? So it's happening with their insulin, but it's also happening with the way that they're viewing calories, and I suppose that's where glucagon really comes in. The satiety. Sorry,
Yeah,
excuse me.
the satiety comes in. Yeah, the glucagon piece is also, if you have less glucagon, like if you're activating glucagon less, meaning you're producing less glucose in your own system, like downstream, yes, probably extremely minor effect though relative to the other two mechanisms and how they affect weight.
Yeah, interesting. So realistically, it seems like it's just helping your body do what it's already supposed to do, just a lot more efficiently.
Yeah.
Isn't it crazy how good medicine works that way?
Well, I think generally there's no medicine that does anything better than your body already does, but like we're talking about a state, typically like if someone has
Hmm.
obesity, or like they probably have some sort of insulin resistance at least, and so you're already kind of out of normal physiology, and so this is trying to return you as best it can to normal physiology. um, and Yeah, and so that's sort of it, nothing's, we still haven't beaten Mother Nature yet,
Sure.
but this is not bad. This is a good attempt.
That's where the myostatin inhibitors come in.
Oh gosh.
That's right. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about like identification, right?
Sure.
How would a person know outside? All right, so if you're BMI 30 plus, right? If you're, in the obese category, right? That might be something that's a qualifier for you. But how outside of that, how might you decide that like this is something necessary or something that would be very helpful for you? How would you qualify yourself to even have this conversation with your physician?
That's a great question. So I'll tell you kind of how I at least approach the question clinically. If a patient comes into me, they're like, "Hey, I'm having trouble losing weight. Um, I have obstructive sleep apnea or hypertension or hyperlipidemia, or I'm pre-diabetic or that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, let's have the conversation. My friend is taking Ozempic, and I want to get on that." That's usually how it starts. Actually, it's like a friend or a family member is on it.
Hmm.
Um, the first thing that I do before and this is in general, before I prescribe any medication, is we've got to be maximizing the lifestyle lever. We got to be pulling that as hard as we can. So if someone is not, within the scope of what's reasonable for them, I don't want them to like miss hours of work or like miss their kid's wedding or something to maximize lifestyle. But within reason, are they doing everything that they can reasonably do within their budget, within their time scale, sacrificing maybe a little bit of sleep, sacrificing maybe a little bit of social stuff with their buddies or, their family a little bit? Are they doing everything they can to, eat the right things, to exercise on a daily basis, to do some zone 2 training, to do some resistance training, to do some hit training, to eat at a relative calorie deficit if they're, quite overweight? Have they tried fasting? Have they tried some of these other things that we incorporate for weight loss? And so usually first visit, we go through that in depth with a fine tooth comb and make sure, okay, are you actually maximizing everything that you can, even though you say, I've tried everything, right? Is that true or not? If they come back and they're like, hey, listen, here's what I've tried. Here's the proof that I've tried it. And maybe it worked for a period of time, but maybe it wasn't sustainable from a standpoint of schedule, or maybe it was sustainable from the standpoint of schedule, but we're still not seeing the anticipated results in terms of weight. Then we can start to have the conversation about weight loss medications. And while GLP-1s aren't the only medication that are out there for weight loss, they're among the best in terms of side effect profile, safety, accessibility, kind of soup to nuts. So then we'll start to have that conversation. Okay, if this is something that you then have kind of exhausted every other avenue for weight loss, and you're a candidate for this based on your BMI and based on your other conditions you may or may not have, then we talk about, okay, which one is most appropriate. And by and large, there are really three big ones that we talk about now. There is the semaglutide, which is the trade name Ozempic, but um, within the weight loss branded medication, it's called Wegovy. There is tirzepatide, which is either Mounjaro as the diabetes med or Zepbound is the weight loss med. And there's the same thing. It's just branded differently for FDA approval. Probably has something to do with more money. Who knows? And then the third one, which just recently got released, is called Orforglipron. I always mispronounce that name. And its trade name is Foundeo, and that one is oral. So it's a pill. You take it once a day as opposed to a once a week injection with the Wegovy or Zepbound. And so we'll talk about it. Does someone want to inject themselves once a week, or do they want to take a pill every day? And that depends really for patient to patient. And then in terms of like the efficacy, the Zepbound or tirzepatide seems to have a little bit better efficacy compared to the semaglutide or the orglipron, the Foundeo, the pill. So I knew I'd get tripped up on the name, or forglipron. But so typically, if someone is like, I just want something that's going to be like, giving me the best result, typically we'll go with tirzepatide for now. And the injection, even if someone's like kind of scared of the injection, the ones that are, from the self-injector vial, it's like a click pen. So you detach it to yourself, you click, you wait a little bit, and then you pull it off. And that's once a week. It's easy. Sometimes if insurance is hesitant about covering this, like if it's Medicare, or this gets into a little bit into the weeds, but there's also a vial version. So like you can get direct from the manufacturer, from Lilly, in fact. The pricing is not too bad. So they'll ship you a little vial, you draw it up with a syringe and needle, and then you just you get yourself. It's not an auto injector, but it's pretty easy. So we'll go through all of that, that kind of next visit. Which one do you think would be best in terms of efficacy, in terms of your preference, in terms of, what's easier for you, in terms of cost? And then as long as they, again, don't have these weird thyroid histories, or they're not allergic to the medication, which really the only way you'd know is if you tried it, then we proceed with giving them the the medication, with the caveat that we're going to be measuring your body composition quite closely. And if you start to fall off the deep end on muscle mass, we're going to have a conversation, and I reserve the right to stop this at that point.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit more. What does that mean? Falling off the deep end. Could you quantify that a little bit?
Yeah. So if they are, and this goes back to like what percentage of weight loss is muscle. And so I will let it slide if half the weight that you lose is muscle, if you have a very high BMI.
Sure.
If you have 100 pounds of fat to lose, fine. 50%, the benefit of the fat loss is going to outweigh, no pun intended, the benefit of the harm of the muscle loss. However, if someone is, say they have a BMI of 32, they're at, say, 200 pounds, and our goal for them is 150, say. If they have lost 10 pounds, but 9 of those 10 pounds are muscle on the in-body, and then we have a conversation, and then next time we check, maybe in a month or two, and we're seeing the same results, we pump the brakes on that, because that is, they've proven that it's not sustainable. They're losing way more muscle than fat, and we're basically just altering their body composition in a really unfavorable way. And we need to really make sure we double click and press pause on this. None of this is emergent. Weight loss is not something that's an emergency. So we have time. We press pause, stop the medicine for a little bit. Let's talk about maximizing, the protein intake in the diet. Let's get you really on a regimen of weight training and resistance training. Prove to me you can do this. And then maybe we revisit that after the fact. I haven't had to do that yet with a patient. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen. But as long as someone is at or under the 50% of total weight loss is muscle, then I am typically quite pleased.
That's great. So that's good for people, especially people listening, the individuals who are possibly going through these kind of secondary means and not being monitored as closely.
Right.
I think that's really important, because I don't want to just focus on our clients, our patients. I think this is important information for people, that if you are not being managed by a physician with this, you need to understand that information. You need to collect the data yourself, because not all weight loss is going to be considered good weight loss here. especially if you are not a very large person to begin with. If you have sub 50 pounds of skeletal muscle mass on your body and you lose 20 pounds and 10 of it is skeletal muscle, well, you're
That's
down
bad
to
news bears.
40.
Yeah.
That's very bad.
Yeah.
It's going to be really challenging to build that muscle back. Skeletal
Absolutely.
muscle is difficult to build. And that genuinely scares me. So I really encourage people, if you're going through a secondary means to acquire these from a third party company or direct consumer type of situation, please, collect that data for yourself. You owe it to yourself. You're spending the money, you're putting in the risk. You should understand. Okay, so I feel very doom and gloom this episode. I'm sorry. I'm trying to be responsible. So is there a preferred training regimen that you want people to utilize with doing this training, but is there something specific that you look for, like times per week, anything like that? I know you said maximize their ability.
Yeah, it's so patient specific and client specific that it's hard to have one thing that is that like one size fits all, but it has to, like, sometimes people are like, hey, I'm really active, but I'm doing like walking and swimming and cycling, and there's not a ton of weightlifting in there. Like, sometimes I'll let that slide if their weight is good and their body composition is pretty good. In this case, though, if someone is exercising but they're not doing dedicated resistance training, we have obviously a very deep conversation about that. It depends really. Like, we try to get people to do as frequently as they can without getting injured, kind of going back to our prior discussion when I interviewed you. But it depends on what patients have access to, depends on what they enjoy doing, what's sustainable. And so that's when I also will, in our practice, we have the luxury, we can send them over to you guys and say, hey, can like work with Derek, work with our, OPP, which is our, like, how we schedule workouts for people kind of remotely, and give them workouts to do. So we have the luxury of that in our practice. Not every patient or person listening might have that luxury. But so that's, it's a tough question to answer, but I would say for most people at a bare minimum, I look for at least, and again, bare minimum, 2 30-minute sessions of dedicated weightlifting per week in someone who's never trained before and is getting on these medications. But I don't know, do you have a way that you think about this? You probably have some patients who are on this type of thing.
Yeah, we have quite a few. Most of them are what I would consider to be like great use cases, and I try to tailor it around like really specific circumstances, right? You use the example of somebody who has 100 pounds to lose. I don't want to say it's fast and loose, but like we're gonna do the maximum that we can to be efficient without many concerns, right? We're gonna push through this, and we're gonna just try to build better habits, so that way once you lose the 100 pounds, you have a healthy person behaviorally, physiologically. Like, this is just a person who's going to be able to continue to improve overall, not just acutely. People who are on the smaller end, we like to monitor them much more closely, because say you're 140-pound person and you're 5'7", right? Well, that's kind of tall and not very heavy. And if you just have a higher concentration of fat mass, maybe you qualify for this for some period of time, whatever the case. I'm not a physician. I'm not going to speak to that, but I'm going to watch your muscle mass like a hawk. And so for me, any additional activity should be like, we should be watching it, because it's just an opportunity for you to burn more calories at that point. And if the goal is to prevent you from burning through more muscle, we have to be really stringent on how we're allocating that caloric burn, right? We want to be efficient with building as much muscle as possible, staying on top of the protein intake, and just generally avoiding extracurricular activity that isn't necessary, right? If you're like, oh, I like to run because it burns calories, and you're eating away at your muscle, I'm going to tell you, don't do that anymore. This is like, these two things don't work well together. So it is highly individualized for us. We do generally try to stick to that 2 to 3 time per week range. Longer training sessions tend to be more efficient because the appropriate rest periods are there and you're not just kind of grinding out, fast 30-minute workouts. But it comes down to the individual.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I was going to say that jives very well with your earlier point of we've got to measure it, right? Like that if you're doing this blind, essentially, that's no bueno. Because how do you know, right? How do you know if you're doing this right or not? And in the last, as we kind of start to wrap up here, I do want to make a point as well that you bring up, and probably this is something you meant you were going to bring up anyways, about if people are getting off of these medications, how do we do that safely? It's always a question people have of, am I going to be on this forever? And if not, how do we do this? Doesn't the weight just come right back if I stop it? And this is where it's really, really critical. There's really not a guideline or a way, one way that we get people off this medication. We can stop it cold turkey if something happens. We prefer not to typically. And the reason why is because if you're using this medication completely as a crutch without also establishing the habits that are then going to carry you through the rest of your life, then this may be something you need to be on for the rest of your life. But if you're doing this with the intent of, hey, I'm going to kind of measure what I'm eating, I'm very mindful about portion size, I'm very mindful about macronutrient breakdown and macronutrient composition of my food, and I'm very on top of weight training, resistance training, the workouts, the calorie burn that I have. I've been monitoring this. If you're doing it kind of the right way, and in my opinion, that is the right way, then when we start to kind of slowly wean you off of this, although you may not have the GLP-1 in your system to kind of cause the early satiety and improve the insulin sensitivity, you have the habits that will then sustain that. You might gain 5-10 pounds back. Okay. But you're not going to gain back 50. You're not going to gain back 100. You're not going to get higher than when you started. And so this is really the key, is if and when people start to think about getting off of these medications, we've really got to make sure that those habits are completely rock solid and just part of their second nature, essentially. So that when we start to dial it back, they're like, oh yeah, this is my normal plate of food is this big instead of this big, my normal workouts are automatically, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and an hour long, like those type of habits that we really have to ingrain in people to make sure that it's sustainable, as we dial back or remove the medication.
Well, I think that's perfect way to kind of cap this episode off, John. You hit all the good points here, and I appreciate you backing me up on all my nonsense here. And, the thing I'll leave off with is to just support that last point you made. I personally am not a strong believer in motivation, right? I don't think it's a real thing, in the way that people utilize it. I think people get that feeling of motivation when they start to feel momentum. And that momentum happens when they start to succeed, when they start to win. People get motivated when they win, when they feel like they're doing well, when they're getting better at things. And so by utilizing something like this, especially if you really need it, if you have that 100 pounds and you're trying to also build those habits, you're trying to just get better, that's the best way to build up the ability to actually like build those habits, to get better, to build that momentum, is to start succeeding in some way. So I'm a huge believer in this for the people who need it, because if you want to be motivated, you need to win, right? And sometimes you just need a little extra help to start winning, because you're right, maybe this isn't forever for you, especially if you can build those habits. And I love that for people.
Yeah.
So that's great. I'm not going to drill you with any more questions there, Doc. So I think we did a good job. So let's end here, and we'll see you guys next time. So thank you very much. This has been Staying Active with me, Derek, and wow, that is Dr. Jon Lis, everybody. Just bask in the glory. Thank you very much.
Oh, gosh.
All right. Bye.
See ya.